Before we delve into this gripping narrative, please share in the comments where you're tuning in from to experience this poignant tale. The night that changed everything. It was just another Tuesday evening, or at least, that's what it was supposed to be. The sun had dipped behind the city skyline, leaving a trail of orange and pink hues against the darkening sky. The streetlights flickered on, illuminating the quiet suburban neighborhood where Daniel Carter lived with his 12-year-old daughter, Emily. Daniel was exhausted. He had just wrapped up another long shift at the auto repair shop, where he worked as a mechanic. The job paid the bills, but it drained him, physically and mentally. As he turned onto his street, he let out a deep sigh. All he wanted was to walk through the front door, take a hot shower, and maybe catch a few moments of peace before bed. But fate had other plans. The moment he parked in the driveway, an unsettling feeling crept over him. Something wasn't right. The house was too quiet. Usually, Emily would be watching TV, talking on the phone with her best friend, or playing with her dog, Max. But tonight, there was nothing. Daniel stepped out of the car, his boots crunching against the gravel. The front door was locked, which wasn't unusual. He unlocked it and stepped inside, instantly greeted by the soft glow of the hallway light. "Emily," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the empty house. Silence. A frown formed on his face as he shut the door behind him. He shrugged off his jacket and tossed his keys onto the kitchen counter. That's when he heard it. A muffled sound. A sob. Daniel's body stiffened. His eyes darted toward the staircase leading to Emily's room. His heart pounded against his ribs as he took slow, deliberate steps up the stairs. Each creak beneath his feet sent a ripple of unease through him. As he reached the second floor, the sound became clearer. Crying. Quiet, restrained, but heartbreaking. He rushed toward Emily's door and knocked gently. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" No response. He tried the handle. It was locked. Panic surged through him. He knocked harder this time. "Emily, open the door." Still nothing. 1,000 terrifying thoughts raced through his mind. Was she hurt? Was someone in there with her? His breathing grew rapid. He had to get in. With one swift motion, Daniel stepped back and slammed his shoulder against the door. The lock snapped, and the door flew open. What he saw next made his blood run cold. Emily sat on the floor, curled into herself, clutching her knees to her chest. Her entire body trembled. Tears streaked cheeks. Red, swollen eyes. Her small hands gripped the hem of her oversized sweatshirt like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Daniel dropped to his knees beside her. "Emily, talk to me," he pleaded. "What happened?" She shook her head violently, her lips quivering. It took her several moments before she could find her voice, and when she did, it was barely a whisper. He was here," she stammered, choking on her words. "He came into the house." Daniel felt his stomach twist into a knot. "Who?" Emily swallowed hard, her hands tightening into fists. "I don't know. I didn't see his face. But I heard him bad. He was inside. I think he was watching me." Daniel felt ice run through his veins. A stranger? In their home. His protective instincts kicked in instantly. His eyes darted around the room, scanning for any signs of forced entry or a hiding spot where someone could still be. His mind screamed at him to check every room, every corner, but first, he had to keep Emily safe. He pulled out his phone with shaky hands and dialed 911. "My name is Daniel Carter," he said urgently when the operator answered. "I think someone broke into my house. My daughter is terrified, and she said she heard someone inside. I need officers here. Now." The operator kept him on the line, assuring him that help was on the way. Daniel could barely process her words. He wrapped an arm around Emily, holding her close, his heart hammering in his chest. Who had been inside their home? And more importantly, were they still there? Minutes felt like hours. Then, sirens. The flashing red and blue lights outside their house brought a strange mixture of relief and dread. 2 police officers rushed inside, weapons drawn, immediately beginning a sweep of the house. Daniel held Emily close, whispering reassurances as she buried her face in his chest. One of the officers, Detective Harrison, returned after the search. "No sign of forced entry," he said, furrowing his brow. "Are you sure someone was here?" Emily sniffled, nodding. I heard footsteps. I heard breathing. It wasn't my imagination." Daniel's jaw tightened. He trusted his daughter. She wouldn't make something like this up. The officer sighed. "We'll check the security cameras in the neighborhood and see if anything was caught on footage. In the meantime, I recommend keeping your doors locked, windows secured, and calling us if you notice anything unusual." Daniel nodded, but deep down, he knew something was terribly wrong. Emily wasn't the type to get scared over nothing. Someone had been in their house. And that meant whoever it was could come back. The shadows in the silence. For most people, sleep is a refuge, a place to escape reality, to rest, to heal. But for Daniel Carter and his daughter, Emily, that night, sleep was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. Long after the police had searched their home and found no immediate threat, the air inside the house remained thick with fear. Daniel sat at the edge of Emily's bed, watching over her as she lay curled up under her blanket, her breathing shallow, her eyes wide open. She was afraid to close them. And Daniel, he was afraid for her. His mind raced through the possibilities. Who could have been in their home? How did they get inside? Why Emily? The weight of not having an answer was unbearable. He had always been her protector, her shield against the world. But tonight, he felt powerless. "Dad?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Daniel turned to her, offering a small, reassuring smile despite the fear clawing at his own chest. "I'm right here, sweetheart." She hesitated before speaking again. "What if he comes back?" Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to say he won't. He wanted to promise her safety, to tell her it was all in her head, that she'd wake up tomorrow and everything would be normal again. But he couldn't lie to her. Instead, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "If he does, he'll have to go through me first." Emily bit her lip, her eyes glistening with tears. "You won't let anything happen to me, right?" Daniel cupped her small hands in his. "Not a chance, kiddo. You're safe. I promise." She nodded, but Daniel knew the fear wouldn't disappear overnight. And neither would his own. The house was silent, but Daniel couldn't rest. Instead of going to his own room, he grabbed a baseball bat from the hall closet and sat on the couch in the living room, staring at the front door. His ears were attuned to every sound. The ticking clock on the wall, the occasional hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustling of the trees outside. But then, a noise, a soft thud from the backyard. Daniel's grip on the bat tightened. He rose slowly, his pulse quickening. He moved toward the back door, careful not to make a sound. His eyes scanned the yard through the kitchen window, barely visible under the dim glow of the porch light. Then, movement. A dark figure just beyond the fence. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. For a brief second, the world slowed. He wasn't sure if it was fear or fury surging through his veins, but one thing was certain: he was done sitting in silence. Without thinking, he unlocked the back door and stepped outside. "Hey!" he called out, his voice firm, unyielding. The figure froze. And then, it ran. Daniel's instincts took over. He bolted after the shadow, feet pounding against the grass. His breath was ragged, his muscles burning, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Whoever this was, they had invaded his home, his daughter's safety. And he needed answers. The chase didn't last long. The figure was fast, but Daniel was fueled by something stronger than exhaustion. He was fueled by a father's rage. When he was close enough, he lunged forward, tackling the intruder to the ground. They tumbled onto the pavement near the end of the street. Daniel pinned the person down, his fists tightening around their collar. But as the streetlight above them flickered, illuminating the stranger's face, Daniel's breath caught in his throat. A boy, no older than 17. His face was thin, his clothes tattered, his eyes wide with fear. He coughed, struggling under Daniel's grip. "Please," the boy rasped. I wasn't gonna hurt her." Daniel's knuckles trembled, his body vibrating with adrenaline. "Who are you? Why were you in my house?" The boy swallowed hard, his face contorted with guilt. I didn't mean to scare her. I just wanted." Daniel wasn't interested in riddles. "Wanted what?" he snapped. The boy hesitated, then finally whispered, "Food." Daniel blinked. "What?" The boy's gaze dropped. "I wasn't trying to steal anything valuable. I swear. I haven't eaten in days. I saw the house, I thought maybe." He exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry." The confession hit Daniel harder than a punch to the gut. He had been expecting a hardened criminal, a predator, someone dangerous. But instead, he was looking at a scared, starving kid. A kid who had terrified his daughter. A kid who had broken into his home out of sheer desperation. For the first time, Daniel really looked at him. His cheekbones were sharp, his fingers trembling, his lips cracked. His clothes were filthy, his sneakers barely held together. Daniel wasn't just holding down a stranger. He was holding down someone who had been abandoned by the world. And suddenly, Daniel's anger melted into something else. Pity. Empathy. Understanding. By the time the police arrived, Daniel had already helped the boy sit up, offering him his jacket. Detective Harrison stepped out of the patrol car, brows furrowed. "Got a call about a suspect being caught. This the guy?" Daniel nodded, but his voice was softer now. "Yeah, but I don't think he's a criminal." The officer glanced between them, taking in the boy's frail frame. "You sure about that?" Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, but I think I want to hear his story first." The boy flinched at the word story, like he wasn't used to people caring enough to ask. Daniel looked at him. "What's your name, kid?" The boy hesitated before answering. "Liam." Daniel nodded. "All right, Liam. Let's start from the beginning. A stranger's truth. They say the world isn't kind to those who fall through the cracks. Some people slip into the shadows, unnoticed, forgotten. Not because they choose to, but because no one reaches out to pull them back." That's what Daniel realized as he sat in his living room, across from the boy he had tackled to the ground just an hour ago. Liam, 17, homeless, starving. Now sitting at Daniel's kitchen table, shoulders hunched, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, the boy looked smaller than he had outside. His wide, nervous eyes flickered between Daniel and the half-eaten sandwich on his plate. He ate cautiously, as if he wasn't sure if the food was real. Emily sat on the couch nearby, still wary. She hadn't said a word since Liam stepped into their home. Not that Daniel could blame her. Detective Harrison leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching the boy with measured patience. "So, Liam," he said, "you want to tell us how you ended up sneaking into this man's house?" Liam lowered his gaze, his fingers tightening around the cup. "I wasn't looking for trouble," he murmured. "I was just desperate." Daniel exchanged a glance with Harrison before speaking. "Start from the beginning, kid. We need to understand." Liam hesitated, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Then, finally, he spoke. "I used to live with my mom," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't much, just a small apartment. But it was home." He stared into his cup, as if searching for memories in the dark liquid. "She got sick," he continued, his voice hollow. "We didn't have insurance. The bills stacked up. We did everything we could, sold everything we owned, borrowed money, even tried crowdfunding. Nothing was enough. When she got worse, she told me to stay strong, that everything would be okay." He let out a shaky breath. She died last year. Silence filled the room. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Liam bit his lip, as if trying to suppress the emotions clawing their way to the surface. The landlord kicked me out a week later. Said I wasn't on the lease, that I was just a kid. Didn't care that I had nowhere to go. He exhaled slowly. I've been on the streets ever since. Daniel ran a hand down his face. He had suspected the kid was homeless, but hearing it aloud made it feel heavier. How long have you been in this neighborhood? Detective Harrison asked. Liam shifted uncomfortably. A couple of weeks. I usually stay near the old train station, but it's getting colder, and people aren't exactly friendly to guys like me. I saw your house a few days ago. Saw that it was just you and your daughter. I thought, maybe there'd be some food, some warmth. He shook his head. I never meant to scare her. I swear. Emily, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke. Then why didn't you just knock? Liam turned to her, startled. She was still curled up on the couch, her expression guarded. Why did you sneak in? She asked, her voice firmer. Liam blinked, caught off guard. Would you have let me in if I did? Emily hesitated. Liam offered a small, sad smile. That's why. A lump formed in Daniel's throat. The truth was hard to swallow. The world wasn't kind to strangers. A boy like Liam, dirty, hungry, and alone. No one would have given him a second glance, let alone a chance. He wasn't a criminal. He was a survivor. Detective Harrison exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, kid, technically, what you did was breaking and entering. But considering the circumstances, he glanced at Daniel. I'll leave it up to you. You want to press charges. Daniel didn't even need to think about it. No, he said firmly. Liam's head shot up, eyes wide with disbelief. You don't. Daniel leaned forward, clasping his hands together. No, I don't. But I need to know something, Liam. If I let you walk out of here, where do you go? Liam hesitated. He opened his mouth to answer but closed it again. Because he had nowhere to go. Daniel sighed. That's what I thought. Emily sat up straighter. Are you saying he can stay? Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temples. I don't know, Em. He turned to Liam. I've got a daughter to protect. I need to know you're not going to bring trouble into our home. Liam swallowed. I won't. I swear. I don't want to go back out there. Silence hung in the air. Finally, Daniel stood. One night. Liam's eyes lit up. You can sleep in the guest room for one night, Daniel repeated, pointing at him. And tomorrow, we figure out what's next. Liam nodded quickly, as if afraid Daniel would change his mind. Thank you. Emily's gaze softened just a little. Detective Harrison smirked but said nothing. Daniel sighed, shaking his head as he grabbed his phone. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but something in his gut told him this was just the beginning. The weight of a second chance. Trust is a fragile thing. It takes years to build, moments to break, and sometimes a lifetime to repair. Daniel Carter never thought he'd be sitting across from a homeless teenager at his own kitchen table, debating whether he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The night had been long, the weight of responsibility pressing heavy on his shoulders. After offering Liam a warm place to sleep, he had stayed awake for hours, his mind battling itself with questions. Did I do the right thing? What if he's lying? What if Emily isn't safe? But then, every time he thought about kicking the kid back onto the streets, he saw the fear in his eyes, the desperation. And suddenly, it didn't feel like a choice at all. It felt like the only thing a decent person would do. Morning came with a crisp chill in the air. The autumn breeze slipped through the small gap in the kitchen window, rustling the curtains as Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee. Liam was still asleep in the guest room. Emily, however, was wide awake, sitting at the kitchen counter, stirring her cereal absent-mindedly. She hadn't spoken much since last night, but Daniel could tell her mind was running just as fast as his. He sighed, pulling out a chair across from her. "Talk to me, Em." She lifted her spoon, watching the milk drip from it before it finally meeting his gaze. "Are we really letting him stay?" Daniel exhaled. "For now." Emily's brows furrowed. "Why?" It was a fair question. Daniel rubbed a hand down his face, choosing his words carefully. "Because sometimes people just need a break. A chance." He leaned forward. "And I know you're scared. I am too. But I don't think Liam is a bad kid. I think he's just lost." Emily pressed her lips together, silent for a moment. Then she muttered, "So what happens next?" Daniel glanced toward the hallway. "That's up to him." By the time Liam finally emerged, the sun had fully risen, painting the sky with golden streaks. He stepped into the kitchen cautiously, his hair still messy from sleep. It was the first time Daniel had really seen him in the light, and it only confirmed what he had suspected the night before. The kid had been through hell. His cheekbones were sharp, his frame too thin, like someone who had been running on fumes for too long. But his eyes held something Daniel couldn't quite place, something between gratitude and fear. Liam hesitated at the doorway, rubbing his arm. "Morning." Emily barely glanced up from her cereal. Daniel, however, nodded toward the counter. "There's food. Eat." Liam blinked, as if the offer itself was foreign to him. Then, without another word, he shuffled toward the fridge, pulling out a piece of toast and some leftover eggs. For a while, there was nothing but the sound of forks scraping plates and coffee being sipped. The silence was thick, too thick. So Daniel broke it. "What's your plan, kid?" he asked, setting his mug down. Liam looked up mid-bite. "Plan?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "What happens after today?" "Where do you go?" Liam stared at his plate. "I don't know." "That's not an answer." Liam sighed, pushing his food around with his fork. "I don't have anywhere to go." He swallowed. "But I can leave if you want me to." Daniel studied him for a long moment before speaking. "That's not what I asked." Liam looked up, confused. "I asked what your plan is, not if you should leave," Daniel clarified. "Because if you're willing to work for it, I might be able to help you." Liam frowned. "Help me how?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "For starters, you need a job. And some stability. I own a small repair shop. You ever work with cars before?" Liam shook his head. "No, but I can learn." Daniel smirked. "Good. Because I don't hire slackers." Liam blinked. "Wait, are you serious?" Daniel shrugged. "Depends. Are you willing to put in the effort?" Liam sat up straighter, his eyes searching Daniel's face for any sign of a joke. When he found none, he let out a shaky breath and nodded. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'll work. I'll do whatever it takes." Daniel nodded, satisfied. "Then we start tomorrow." Emily, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke up. "What if he messes up?" Liam tensed. Daniel turned to his daughter, his voice firm but kind. "Then we deal with it. Together." She didn't respond right away, but after a long pause, she finally let out a small sigh. "Fine." It wasn't a promise of trust, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. That evening after dinner, Liam helped clean up without being asked. He washed the dishes, wiped the counters, and even took out the trash. Daniel watched him closely, noting the way he hesitated before touching anything, as if afraid he was overstepping. It was strange, having a stranger in their home, but at the same time, something about it felt right. When the clock struck 10, Daniel stood and stretched. "All right, I'm calling it a night. You know where the guest room is." Liam nodded. "Thanks again. For everything." Daniel patted his shoulder. "Just don't make me regret it." Liam smiled. Small, but real. As Daniel turned toward the stairs, he caught Emily watching from the hallway. She had her arms crossed, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Everything okay, Em?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. I think you were right. Daniel raised an eyebrow. About what? She looked toward the guest room where Liam had just disappeared. About second chances. A small smile tugged at Daniel's lips. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a mistake after all. The road to redemption. Some moments change your life instantly, like a sharp turn on an unfamiliar road. Other moments are slower, like the gradual rise of the sun after a long, cold night. For Liam, it was both. 3 weeks had passed since Daniel had taken him in. 3 weeks of waking up to a roof over his head. 3 weeks of working at Daniel's repair shop, learning how to hold a wrench, how to change oil, how to fix something instead of running away from it. For the first time in a long time, Liam wasn't just surviving. He was living. One evening, as Daniel was locking up the shop, he caught Liam wiping down a set of tools, carefully placing them back where they belonged. "You know," Daniel said, leaning against the counter, "most new guys don't bother cleaning up." Liam smirked. Most new guys probably don't remember what it's like to have nothing. Daniel exhaled, crossing his arms. "You're different now." Liam shrugged. "I don't feel different." Daniel studied him. "That's because change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the small things. The way you work, the way you look people in the eye, the way Emily doesn't flinch around you anymore." Liam swallowed hard. He had noticed it too. At first, Emily had kept her distance, watching him carefully, unsure if she could trust him. But now she talked to him, asked him questions, even laughed at his stupid jokes. She still didn't completely trust him, but she no longer feared him. And that meant everything. That night, as they sat around the dinner table, something shifted. Emily put down her fork and looked at Liam. "I need to ask you something." Liam tensed. "Okay." She hesitated before speaking. "Do you have anyone? Like, family?" Daniel's chest tightened at the question. But he didn't stop her. Liam blinked, surprised. No, not anymore." Emily bit her lip. "And before?" Liam's fingers clenched his napkin. "Just my mom." Silence. Then, after a long pause, Emily spoke again, so quietly it almost wasn't there. "You have us now." Liam froze. His heart pounded in his chest as the words sank in. Daniel watched as something flickered in Liam's eyes, something fragile, something raw. It was the look of someone who had never dared to believe in hope. Slowly, Liam exhaled. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I guess I do." The weeks turned into months. Liam kept working at the shop, proving himself time and time again. He even started taking GED prep classes, determined to make something of himself. But the biggest change, it wasn't in the way he worked. It was in the way he held himself. He no longer walked with his head down, no longer shrank into the shadows, afraid of being seen. And one day, one ordinary, unremarkable day, Daniel handed him a set of keys. Liam frowned. "What's this?" Daniel smirked. "The old truck out back. It needs work, but it's yours, if you can fix it." Liam gaped at him. "You're giving me a truck?" Daniel shrugged. "Think of it as an investment." He patted Liam's shoulder. "You've earned it, kid." Liam looked down at the keys in his palm, his throat tight. He had never been given anything before, not like this. Not because someone believed in him. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged, and he wasn't going to waste it. One night, months later, Daniel sat on the porch, watching the stars. Liam stepped outside, standing beside him. "Can I ask you something?" Liam said. Daniel took a sip of his coffee. "Shoot. Why'd you take me in?" Daniel smirked. "Still trying to figure that out myself." Liam chuckled. "No, seriously. You didn't have to." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, finally, he answered. "Because when I looked at you, I saw a kid who had two choices." He exhaled. "You could have kept running, kept hiding. ended up on the wrong side of the law, or worse. He turned to Liam. Or you could have gotten a second chance. Liam swallowed hard. And you decided to give me one. Daniel nodded. Yeah. Liam looked away, his throat tightening. For years, he had believed the world had no place for him. But now he wasn't just some kid on the streets. He was part of something. He was home. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow.